But first, as you may have been hearing on Manx Radio News, women in one of the world's most poverty-stricken countries could benefit from a fundraising drive here in the Isle of Man. And it's all a part of this year's Christian Aid Week, which started yesterday and is aiming to raise £30,000 to help those living in remote villages in Burundi. I am delighted to say we are joined by the Isle of Man Christian Aid Coordinator, Louise Whitelegg, who fairly recently spent a month in the country. Louise, it's going to be almost impossible, I think, to distill your month-long experiences into a short space of time. But what is the overwhelming feeling that you left there with?
That the English language doesn't express any, and it doesn't help to express what I saw. We use the word starving. You know, you come home from work and you go, "Oh, I'm starving." No, these people are starving. We talk about extremes, we talk about resilience, we talk about courage, and I thought I was quite well educated in these international development issues, but actually after spending so much time there, I just learnt so much from them, and I've come back a different person. I really have. It was life-changing.
I mean, you've brought a lot of photographs in, and some of them are just incredibly moving. We're going to post those on the Women's Day blog after the programme. But this notion of looking after women in this country, what were the sort of the gender issues that you saw when you were out there?
Big question. One of the main things is that it's the women who have the burden of poverty always on them. It's as a general rule, it's the women who provide the dinner, it's the women who provide the food, it's the women who get the kids to school. But over in Burundi, 90% of the people over there are it says employed in agriculture, which again, the English language lets you down. It's more like allotments, because the land that they have is between half an acre and an acre, and that's to support the whole family and to sell any leftovers that they've got. You've got some amazing statistics. 65% of the population are living below the extreme poverty line, which is even less than $1 a day. And it's the women who bear the burden of this. And it's also the women who talk. So this year's Christian Aid Week project is really quite clever, if I do say so myself. The Isle of Man government provided a grant to another local Isle of Man charity to translate interactive health DVDs into the native language. And these DVDs were translated into Kirundi, which is the Burundian native language. So we've got this resource, but it's not being used out in the field. So this year's project, we're going to be training the women, we're going to be buying bicycles, and as there's only 5% of the population have access to electricity in Burundi, so we're going to be giving them solar panels and DVD players, and then we're going to be sending these women out with these DVDs to show to other groups of women, to show to schools, to show to health centres, to get that conversation started. Now, I played some of these DVDs while I was there because I met with the Mothers Union. Wow, it was just like walking into a room with people I've known all my life. And we sat down and we put this DVD on, and it stops at the end of each section and then asks you a question. And it's quite a leading question the way it's asked, so it could quite easily be yes or it could quite easily be no. So it's to stimulate debate and to get people talking about what they've just seen. So these women who are highly educated women who go out and do health promotion are sat in this room squabbling about whether the answer is yes or no on this DVD. And so to watch how clever these DVDs are at working. And I've seen them in action in the field as well. So we walk into a room, we show the DVD to the group of ladies that we're talking to. But you look behind you and the doorway and the windows are filled with all the children and the men who aren't necessarily interested on first appearance, but they come in and they're educated as well. So it's a really interesting project.
So when you say talk about the DVD and the questions on the DVD, can you give us an example of what some of the content is?
Well, the DVD that we chose to watch was Becoming a Woman. So it talks you through all the different changes in your body. It talks you through what becoming a woman is about. But then there's other DVDs that cover issues such as soil erosion, that cover deforestation, that cover becoming a man, when to have a baby, malnourishment, how to get the best nourishment out of food, clean water. You know, it's all the basic health issues that we might take for granted that we know, but actually it does need discussing and explaining to people in a level and a language that they understand.
And in terms of the way that you were welcomed over there, and I suppose I'm thinking about how safe you felt in this part of the world.
I have to say, I never ever, I have a very good antennae for danger, and I've visited quite a lot of countries and my antennae has gone off frequently. Also in England in certain situations, but not one point did I feel threatened or challenged or uncomfortable whilst in Burundi. I was looked after, I was welcomed, and no problem at all. And it's interesting because before I went, I obviously looked at the media and I looked at the stories on the internet, and I have to say, that is not the place that I visited. Factually, a lot of the information that's out there is incorrect, and a lot of it seems to me quite sensationalised. But one of the problems is the country's first language is French. So a lot of the NGOs and the other charities and organisations, have they've been rationalising their resources. They've pulled out of Burundi because it's French, so it's been punished for not having English as a first language. But the more people who've pulled out, the less on the ground data and real stories there are coming out. So it's a real cauldron of politics there at the moment.
Just for people who might not be familiar, can you just explain exactly where it is?
Yes, well, Burundi, one of the things it's got in common with the Isle of Man is it very rarely deserves a name on the map. You know, when we see the Isle of Man on the map, it's just a blob, isn't it? And we don't get Isle of Man on it. And it's the same with Burundi. If you have a look at the map of Africa, slap bang in the centre, you've got the big Democratic Republic of Congo. Always make sure you got the teeth in for that one. And if you look to the right, there's then two little blobs, and it's the bottom blob of the two, very small, just down from Rwanda, and it's a bit bigger than Scotland, so it's not a huge country at all. But we've got so much in common with them. When I was over there talking to people, I kept referring to Burundi as an island, because it really did feel like an island. It's such a small society and everybody knows everybody else. My translator, I was travelling all over the country with him, and he'd say, "Oh, I went to school with him," or "Oh, that's my brother's sister's cousin over there." And it was just so many similarities, and the attitude and the culture and trade law, Burundian style. Oh, so much in common.
It does raise that issue, though, that, you know, we do sometimes get people saying, we talk about things like that, it might be similar to the Isle of Man, but it's not the Isle of Man, so why should we be helping them?
Do you know, when I go away, my husband doesn't like to travel. He's very Manx. And I go away and I get homesick and I miss my husband and I miss my dogs, and not necessarily in that order, but don't tell him. And I look up at the moon and I think to myself, that's the same moon as my husband's seeing. And it shrinks the world for me. And when I went over there and visited these people in Burundi, it does feel like an alien planet. It really does, because it's so completely different to anything that we have over here. It's completely inconceivable if you've never seen it. It's amazing. But these are the people that share the same sky, that share the same air, that share the same moon as us. And because we don't see them every day, doesn't mean that they're not part of this kingdom that we live in.
One of the things you did was you took some pictures that Manx school children had drawn. You took them out there, and you got some back. And you've brought some in with you today, and this kind of goes back to the first question about the gender divide and the expectations that there are of females over there. Just explain this picture that you've brought in for us.
Well, the picture. This is one of my favourite pictures. We have in Christian Aid, we have a gender violence programme that we teach in schools. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to break down those gender barriers. So before the gender violence programme in schools, teachers, it was perfectly acceptable to beat and hit the children as a measure of discipline. It was perfectly acceptable for the girls to stay behind after school, to clean the school for the next day. It was perfectly acceptable for just the girls to go and get the water that was needed from the wells. So after this programme, the boys are now realising that actually it's their duty as well. And one of my absolute beautiful favourite pictures that the children have drawn for me is a picture of two girls with brushes looking at two boys, also with brushes, and they're just cleaning as equals. They're both on an equal level. But it's the expression on the girl's face. It just says it all. And this is the goosebumps are back. This is a drawing by a young girl that's expressing, I think, her gratitude for equalising the roles of men and women. Because it's about education, it's about teaching the children. If we want to make change, we have to teach this generation, we have to change this generation's attitude. We can't just keep fighting and attacking the end results. We have to look at the root causes, and we have to get in there, and we have to have these conversations, and difficult conversations with them, and changing how they see the gender roles. And all the children, male and female, who've been on this course, it's been a revolution for them. It really has been an eye-opener. And the boys are now quite happy in pulling their own weight, because they're seeing that the girls have a duty and ability to go to school just as much as the boys have an ability to go to school.
That's fantastic to hear. And on the back of that as well, you've brought in with you also these little cards with the ribbon on, Thursdays in Black. Just tell us about those.
Well, Thursdays in Black is a movement, a worldwide movement of women who basically, women have had enough, groups of women who've had enough. So it started, there was groups of Japanese women in the First World Wars who were used as comforters, shall we say. And they couldn't complain and they couldn't argue, but one of the things they could do was protest by wearing black, because they weren't able to vocalise. There's been other incidents of where there's war and the men and boys are getting killed, and the women have gone out in black to protest, and again as a silent protest. So when I went to Burundi, I met with the gender violence programmes over there. I met with programmes specifically for women. So we deal with the physical effects of assault, and then we try and deal with the psychological effects of assault. But one of the things, when women have been assaulted, unfortunately in Burundi, the men have an attitude that it was their fault and that they were unfaithful in some way. So the men quite often leave the women. And then that leaves the women in a very vulnerable economic position, because the man's left, they've left with the children, and they've got no means to support themselves. So one of the things that I'm trying to do for these women is to give them something to help them generate income. So I've got two projects, one of which is jewellery. So I'm providing them with the knowledge and equipment to be able to make their own jewellery. Because the other thing is, you know what it's like, you're talking, the article you mentioned before about the writing project, when you're sat in a room and people say, oh, talk about it, it's incredibly difficult to do. Mm-hmm. But if you use a different medium, so in that case it was writing, but in this case we're talking about jewellery, you know what it's like when you sat there, you can concentrate on the thing that you're making, and then the talking comes naturally and it's more honest. So that's one project. And the other project is, specifically with the black ribbons, half of the money is going to Stay On Island to the Women's Aid, and then the other half of the money we're hoping to buy a sanitary towel machine, so that the women in Burundi can make their own sanitary towels, thus giving them a source of income, but also having the knock-on effect that it improves the hygiene of all the women in the local area. So it's one of those win-win things, we're hoping.